Hey everyone, it's great to be back in class with you all. And for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our assignment. I really enjoyed this reading. Uh, Honestly, addiction and recovery was something that I always attributed to other people, never necessarily to myself. So it was great to read, especially the author's story of how he understands Adam and Eve's experience in the Garden of Eden. Um, I, I just had never heard it put that way. He compared Adam and Eve to little children instead of hostile rebels. Well, of course, I don't think I ever viewed them as hostile rebels, but I think that's often the attribute we give to people who are addicted to something. But the author says their lack of wisdom made them exceedingly vulnerable to temptation. So I think they were just foolish. They didn't know that once they started eating from the tree, that they wouldn't be able to stop. And I think that addiction for us is similar to that. It forces us to need an attachment to something that isn't God. So that kind of leads me to my definition of what I feel like addiction and bondage are. I think they are very closely related. They're something that we would prefer not to be doing, not to be a part of, but that we equally don't want to give up. So that's that balance of wanting freedom, but not being able to attain it because we kind of like the way that this thing that is holding us back feels. And I think recovery and deliverance, just as in the story of Adam and Eve, God didn't just kick them out of the garden. He made them clothes and then he set them out. So I think there's grace and love available to us from God. And I think that's where recovery and deliverance fit into the picture of addiction. Let's see. I do know people that have recovered from addiction, but as I've heard their stories, my dad is one of them. He was an alcoholic before I was born and into like the first and second years of my life. And then he gave up that addiction for a nicotine addiction. And eventually he was delivered from both of them. And while I believe his story is true, I think there was always this element of, I think because I was so young that I didn't understand, I don't know, I almost felt like it wasn't real, like it was a fairy tale, like the thing that he was addicted to, well, it just must not have been that strong of an addiction if he just magically gave it up. In my mind, that's the word that comes to mind, that it was magic, that he was all of a sudden just poof, and things were better. So in my mind, when I think of churches that offer recovery and deliverance ministries and they focus on them, I don't know. I've always had a really hard time with it. Not that I don't think God can heal from those things, but I think I've always struggled with understanding and taking it very seriously because I've never contemplated the fact that I myself am addicted to things too. So I have never gone to a church that made it a priority. Like I said, my dad is a pastor and he talks about it often, but it's never been something that he's talked about a ton. And the church that I'm currently pastoring, we also don't talk about it very much. I think it's been on some people's minds, but it's not something that we regularly discuss. So as I think about what does recovery and deliverance look like as a form of spiritual formation, I think for me, it's going to be understanding the fact that addiction is something that each person deals with, that it's closer to idolatry than I think the connotation that addiction has for me, of being something that only affects alcoholics and heavy drug users. It's a plague that separates us from God, and we all have a problem with it. So I think being able to identify and come to grips with the fact that we are all addicted to something, and beginning to identify that and work through it, I think it will reveal to me this semester, and to the people in my congregation, the fact that we all need grace. It's not just the people who suffer from big, flashy sins, but it's the people who silently carry around sins. I think of my addiction to sugar. I think I just make it something to joke about, when in fact it really is something that provides a comfort, a safety blanket, to not having to deal with or eat well, because I just want to snack. And I'm sure there's even more to that if I dug into it. So I think understanding that grace is available and what love looks like, I think that's when recovery and deliverance from addiction become a very practical and important part of our spiritual formation.